from MTN, the Montana Television Network. This is Face the State.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Face the State. This morning we're in Yellowstone National Park. We're in the Mammoth Hot Springs area in the north end of Yellowstone. But as you know, if you've ever visited this national park, it's as varied north and south as it is east and west. The weather can be different as well. We are here on a spring day. 2 days from now, you easily could see the sun shining here in Yellowstone. The interesting thing that's been going on over the last number of years in Yellowstone is an increase in visitation. 20% over the last several years, up to 4.2 million visitors last year. For the next half hour, we're going to talk about some of the challenges facing our first national park, Yellowstone, as those population numbers continue to increase. This morning, we're going to chat with Park Superintendent Dan Wink. Dan, we're working on this series on Yellowstone, and Yellowstone is so many things to so many different people. What is it to you? You're the superintendent of this great place. You get to spend time here, unlike a lot of us. What is Yellowstone to you, Dan?
Yellowstone is probably one of the greatest remnants of the American West, and it's really I think more than that. It's symbolic of wild places. It really gives people a chance to have a glimpse of what this country was like prior to the time that we had the Western movement and civilization that came into this area. It's just remarkable.
At the same time, though, it's still this gigantic science lab. I mean, we have the opportunity to study fire. We have the opportunity to study bison and wolves, and in a completely different place than you can do it almost anywhere else in the world. That's got to be exciting as well.
Well, it's part of at the core of the largest nearly intact ecosystem in the temperate zone, in the world. And the fact that we had people who saw the need to set aside places like this 145 years ago is truly remarkable. I mean, can you imagine today, taking those kind of steps, to take those kind of actions that would allow for a place like Yellowstone to exist? Because over half the world's geysers, over 10,000 thermal features. It is a laboratory. It's a laboratory that's just not on the megafauna, the large ungulates and bears that we have in the park, but it's also a laboratory on thermophiles, things that have led to breakthroughs in research and discoveries and innovation, around the world. So these kind of places, I don't think their value has yet been fully realized. And I'm not talking about the value of emotional renewal, that people get when they come and they're able to experience a place like this. I'm talking about some of the hard value of discoveries that have been made through research. I think there's many, many more of those to come as well.
I agree, and I think that the part that's fascinating, you touched on it at the beginning of this, is we could have made a lot more money here doing it a different way. Locking it up, protecting it like we did, that financially not the best way to do that. You could have been selling hot water, and back in those days, this was a money maker that we chose not to send it that direction. That's pretty phenomenal.
Actually, I think one of the reasons that Yellowstone was able to be protected was because they didn't see it as a moneymaker. They didn't see the forest as a forest that was going to have a great value in terms of logging. They didn't see agriculture. They didn't see grazing. They didn't see all those things. What they saw was some attractions and some, if you will, oddities at the time, in terms of geysers and thermal, that they looked for another value. But I think almost one of the keys to protecting this place is that there was not perceived to be a higher and better use in terms of the consumptive side of the resources, at the time, that it was seen to be a place that needed to be protected for what was here.
The realities, though, more and more people are coming to enjoy all that Yellowstone has to offer. That's a challenge. 4.2 million people through the gates here last year. It doesn't show any signs of letting up. Where are we going with all of that?
Well, I think we have to understand exactly what we're going to do about the visitation to Yellowstone National Park. I mean, we have had almost a 22% increase over the last 2 years. And a 22% increase when you're at 3.5 million people is a lot of people. And so now at over 4.2 million visitors, we are taking a very active approach to looking at what the level of visitation does in terms of its impact on the resources of the park, but also its impact on visitor experience. I mean, how is visitor experience being affected by all the people trying to, the boardwalks are crowded. You can't get a hotel room in Yellowstone National Park many days throughout the summer without a lot of advanced planning. Same for campgrounds. The least studied mammal in Yellowstone National Park is the human.
Right.
And so we have to change that. And we are developing, and we have started to really work hard on a social science program to really understand the effects of people on the natural resources of the park, but also people on the visitor experience. And so until we really have a lot more information, it's too early to say this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to solve the problem. I think solving the problem could be, September is the new August. October is the new September in terms of the amount of visitors that come to the park. And so the seasons are stretching. Our concessionaires are stretching their services in order to provide services for visitors. So everyone's trying to react to that. But we are close to capacity, if not at capacity, in the middle of the summer. Just the sheer volume of people are here, the amount of parking spaces that are here, the amount of space there is within the geyser basins around the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, certainly in the Old Faithful area, are stretching the limits. And unfortunately, what comes with all those people is also the problems, whether it be automobile accidents, and society does not leave their problems at home when they come to Yellowstone National Park. And so we have to deal with all the societal problems that are at the park as well. We have an overnight population in Yellowstone National Park in the middle of the summer of over 20,000 people. And that takes a law enforcement staff. That takes an emergency medical services staff. And those folks they're stressed. There's a lot of pressure on them to perform their duties, but they're doing it extraordinarily well. And then, what happens? What's the experience like to view Old Faithful amidst 3,000 to 4,000 to 5,000 people surrounding you versus the opportunity to experience it with, for example, in the winter, where you might be viewing it alone or with small groups of people. I think the number of visitors changes the experience a lot. But the interesting thing is the visitors themselves. I think it's 84% of the visitors say that they're having a great experience when they come to Yellowstone National Park. That's a wonderful number. They do point out the fact that congestion, traffic, parking is one of the major obstacles to enjoyment of their visit.
Yeah, I think that's the part. In my time, I started working here in 1989, and my favorite place in the park is Norris Geyser Basin. I just find that just fascinating. The last time I went there, I never actually got to see it. Drove around the parking lot many times and couldn't actually find a place to park and couldn't get in there. You're talking about that from the viewer point of view. That makes it really challenging. That parking lot, at least for that moment when I was there, you were at saturation. That was it.
We were, and probably there were more of you following around in the parking lot. We do have plans to look at, expanding the parking areas. But the real question is, we're talking about putting in a parking lot at Ferry Falls this year because we built a new trail so people can have an overlook of the Grand Prismatic Spring, which is going to be a tremendous opportunity for visitors. But people who are familiar with visiting the Midway Geyser Basin and Grand Prismatic and in that area already know how overcrowded that area is and how difficult it is to find a place to park. We look at simple things like making a one-way travel around a boardwalk, just to increase the capacity. You have to look at basically every tool that you have available. But does building a new parking lot just move the problem to another area? If it's only, how big of a parking lot do you need? We're never going to build all the parking lots people would like to have. Is alternative transportation an option? And it may be. But then how do you pay for it? And how does that all work? And I would just say we're looking at all those things to try to figure out how we best solve the problem of, first and foremost, protecting Yellowstone National Park. And then, secondarily, how we make sure the visitor experience is still a high-quality visitor experience. You look at the economic benefit of Yellowstone National Park to the local communities, and that just came out within the past couple weeks, and it's extraordinary. I think, there is actually an economic argument to be made for protecting Yellowstone National Park more so than there's an economic argument to be made for allowing more people. Because if you don't protect this place, ultimately you will not have a place that people want to come and visit, and that you will have destroyed one of the greatest ecosystems and most diverse ecosystems anywhere on the planet.
You build more parking lots at Norris, but nobody came to see the parking lots in Norris. They came to see the Norris Geyser Basin. That balance, you constantly have to achieve that, and somewhere along the way, somebody's going to have to be told no. That's going to be the reality, I would think. 4.2 turns into 5.2. Now you've got a different situation here. That's all in the works. I know that's all being studied, but how do you see that going?
Well, you know, there's intended consequences and there's unintended consequences for everything. And just using the Norris Geyser Basin as an example, let's just say you made a 50% increase in the size of the parking area and you could accommodate more people. That's also going to put 50% more people on the trails in the Norris Geyser Basin. What have you done to the visitor experience then in the Norris Geyser Basin? So you have to weigh all of those things, together. There's certainly the trends. If you look at the long-term trends in visitation, we will have, whether it's this year or next year or 2 years from now, we'll have a dip in visitation. Maybe gas prices will go up to $4 a gallon instead of $2.50 or whatever they're going to be this summer, and that's going to affect it. And I think it's easy for people to say, see, we've sort of maxed out. But if you look at the long-term trends, I think you will. If you don't do anything different, you will get to the 5 million, and you will keep increasing the level of visitation. That's why 3 years ago, we really started to say, we have to understand this. We have to understand if it is going to be necessary to place limits on visitation, and if it's necessary to place limits on visitation, what does that look like? How can we implement it? We do it in the winter. Obviously, it's a vastly different story when you have 60,000 people who go into the interior of Yellowstone National Park in the winter. We have mass transportation, or we have limited uses of snowmobiles to get them there. But the winter is a lot different than the summer in Yellowstone National Park. May through September is a pretty intense visitation periods in this park, and we are very concerned, and we're looking at what are the potential solutions to make sure we protect this place.
I was just wondering, I know you've done some research and you've done some panels and small groups. What do you think is the appetite for people dealing with controls like that?
I think people really haven't fully grasped what it might mean in terms of potentially limits on visitation to Yellowstone National Park. I think the best thing I've heard when we've gone to local communities is some of the communities recognize that we have a problem in Yellowstone National Park in terms of the amount of visitation, and that we have to take some proactive steps in order to make sure that we are, once again, doing those two things of protecting and providing for visitor experience. But other communities are basically don't see the problem. And the closer you are to the park, the more you see the problem. The farther away you get, it's less of a direct impact, if you will, on them. I think it's incumbent upon us to educate, the business community in the 3 surrounding states in terms of what's happening within Yellowstone National Park. And I think without the data, we will never be successful. If you ask me right now, do I have a vehicle problem or a people problem? I can't give you the answer to that. I don't know if I have too many vehicles or if I have too many people or if I have too many of both. Certainly the roads and parking are congested, but are we at capacity in terms of distribution of people through the park and visitor use and enjoyment of some of the iconic sites within the park? If you look sheerly at the amount of road, amount of parking in the park, there's some things that would tell you we're only at 82% of capacity in Yellowstone National Park. Right. But that assumes that the park is going to be equally, people are going to be equally distributed through the park, that there's not going to be wildlife jams, that people are going to be able to travel basically at the speed limit, and that every parking space is utilized, sort of equally throughout the park. It's not real. I can guarantee you that we're over capacity at Old Faithful, at Midway Geyser Basin, at Norris Geyser Basin, at Mammoth, at Canyon, that during the peak season, during peak times, we have more visitors than we can accommodate in a manner that I think they would like to enjoy the park, and we would like for them to be able to enjoy the park.
While that's all going on, you also have the spotlight constantly being shown on you for grizzly bears, wolves, bison. You have these things that have sparked lots of controversy over the years and things like that. Let's start with bison a little bit about that. That's maybe the hot topic right now. Where do they go? What do you do? Where do you see this going, Dan?
You know, I actually believe we're at a moment in time right now where we have perhaps an opportunity to take some great steps forward with bison management. Certainly, going into last winter, we had about 5,500 bison in the park. We had a very successful year this year working with our Native American communities in terms of the transfer and movement of bison to slaughter to help us control the population. And that probably, you know, we have a target of reducing that population of bison. It is probably the most complex problem in Yellowstone National Park because there are so many different interests. You know, we have I think that we have an opportunity to look at what the population numbers should be. I think we're starting to look at the tools, which include state hunts and tribal hunts, you know, outside of Yellowstone National Park. I'm very hopeful that ultimately we'll be able to go through a quarantine process that people will understand and support that will allow us to move bison from Yellowstone ecosystem to other parts of the state, to tribal or public lands. I'm optimistic that we can start down that trail. Certainly we have to maintain the public trust. We have to make sure that we're not, that the threat of the spread of disease is eliminated, if possible to eliminate it. But I think we're at a threshold where we can make some positive changes for bison management, not just in the Yellowstone ecosystem, but literally in the western United States. And the Yellowstone bison are incredible in terms of the fact that it is probably the largest, free roaming to a great extent herd of bison, that's left in North America, and it's a great resource that we need to figure out a way that resource can be shared.
I think you have some markers they'll show that your success should be pretty good. Grizzly bear recovery has been fantastic in Yellowstone and outside that magic bubble that is Yellowstone. Wolf reintroduction, we talked to Doug about that. They didn't kill all the elk like we were talking about. We've learned all of that. Bison's the next step. How does that function? Yellowstone National Park is this great little entity, but it isn't in a biodome. There's not a roof over the top of it. Everything that happens here doesn't stay here. That's the challenge, I think, that you're talking about with bison.
Well, transboundary issues, for whether it be for bison, whether it be for grizzly bears, wolves, or elk, are all one of the major problems that we have in the park, or major opportunities. And certainly, bison left to their own devices, and we would love to see bison treated like wildlife, like all those other species of animals are. Certainly, they would migrate out of the park, and not just within the Gardner Basin or the Hebgen Basin on the west side of the park, but they would extend their migration, and they would pioneer into new areas, and they would populate those areas. We understand in today's society that that's not realistic, that they can go wherever they want. But I think they need to be able to take full advantage of the landscape that's available to them on the north side, outside of the park, and on the west side. I'm very pleased, the governor has taken the actions that he has in terms of habitat outside the park. I think that's part of the reason we have an opportunity now to do more. But the transboundary issues and the disease associated with bison, thankfully there's not been any transmission of the disease from bison, to domestic cattle. And so why do we treat bison different than we treat elk that have transmitted the disease to domestic cattle? I think those are some of the questions that we collectively, and not only Yellowstone National Park, but the states and the different stakeholder groups have to come to grips with in terms of how can we best manage the species for the American public overall.
Is that part of the education process that's with that? Because I think a lot of people don't understand when you're talking about Yellowstone bison, they're in the Gardner Valley, you're going out into the Gardner Basin there. Who that all involves? I mean, I know that you're talking about Forest Service, you're talking about state, you're talking about counties, you're talking about Department of Livestock. There's so many players involved in that, and people out away from that maybe don't see that. Is that part of what we're having to do here, is education as well about what the reality of all of that is?
Well, I think certainly educating the public about the totality of the bison in Yellowstone National Park. First of all, it's probably the greatest conservation story for wildlife, perhaps in the United States. I mean, we went from a population of less than 25 animals in Yellowstone National Park to now a population going into last winter of 5,500 animals. That's extraordinary. And it's in disease. I mean, nothing has detected any outside genetics in the bison in Yellowstone National Park. That truly is, extraordinary. So educating people. I mean, we do have not only the National Park Service. We have Department of Agriculture within the Forest Service and the APHIS, Animal Plant Health Inspection Service. We have the state of Montana. The Department of Livestock, the state veterinarian. We also have the state of Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks that are all part of the government entities, if you will, that are managing. Then you have the stakeholder groups. You have the ranching communities. You have the environmental communities who all have different goals for how bison are treated. And mine's pretty simple. I would like to see them treated as wildlife. I believe that we can get there. I believe that we have solutions that we can work within, even within defined areas of space where they can be wildlife. But we have to step forward and we have to take advantage of opportunities that we have. And I think we're poised to have the right discussions to get us there.
I think education is all part of that, though. I mean, we talk about taking bears off the dumps. You're going to ruin that's not going to work. You bring wolves in here, it's going to destroy the elk. We've gotten through some of those fairy tales that were at the beginning of that. That's maybe the next step with bison. Is that what I'm gathering for you? Is that let's get to the reality of what we're talking about?
Well, I think education is important in terms of all species of animal, maybe even especially bison. But just look back over the last 7 years. When I arrived in Yellowstone National Park in the spring of 2011, it was a very harsh winter, and there were a lot of bison out of the park. But only in that winter, only 25 bison were really allowed to be outside of the park. We were hazing bison back into the park. We've come a long way. And when I say we've, I'm talking collectively in the terms of all the different agencies that manage bison. I mean, we now, have bison hunts. We're trying to encourage bison to move along a greater part of the landscape in the Gardner Basin, to enable those hunts. The state of Montana and the governor have allowed for more habitat for bison outside of the park. I think we've had citizens working groups that have worked on helping us find solutions to this. All of that, I think, has gone to the education of a larger segment of the public. And there's many people, I think, who in the Montana and the area of Yellowstone National Park who have taken the time to educate themselves about what are the issues related to bison and why are they different from elk or any other migratory animal inside. It's harder to educate outside of the general area of the park. We're spending a lot of time and energy trying to get the story told. Every spring I get thousands and thousands of emails asking me why we're managing bison the way we're managing them. And to try to explain a 20-year history of bison management and agency cooperation and an interagency bison management plan and and disease and the potential, of that disease and the impact on the ranching community can't be done in a few sound bites. But we spend a lot of time, and if you were to go to our website, you see a lot of information, and we try to get the information out. But it's not easy. But I think it's been successful because today on the landscape, in the winter, to have 25 bison out of the park is not something that's not an experiment that we're watching. It's like encouraged. And we actually hope to get more bison on the landscape within the Gardner Basin that would facilitate Native American hunts, that would facilitate state hunts, and that would help us deal with some population control other than capture and ship to slaughter.
It's reflective of what goes on here in Yellowstone all the time. I think we talked to Doug about the wolves, and the population is varied with that, and the grizzly bears they've come and gone, and we've done all of those kind of things. Talked to John about fire and how the park has changed from all of that. You've had a chance to experience Yellowstone from a couple of different. I know you had worked here years ago, and now you're back as a superintendent. This might be the most dynamic place on earth, and a lot of people don't even recognize that fact. They come to visit once when they're a kid, bring their kids back once, and it looks kind of the same as it always is. That's not the reality here. Yellowstone is the most dynamic place maybe in the lower 48.
Well, it is an incredible landscape. And, everything you do in Yellowstone National Park is controversial. I can say that without fear of contradiction. I mean, look at native fish. Native fish conservation in this park is we have lake trout that have basically taken over the Yellowstone Lake, and we're really causing a dramatic decline in cutthroat trout within Yellowstone Lake. And we've had a very incredible program, to try to restore the native fish as the dominant species in Lake Yellowstone, supported by our friends, Yellowstone Foundation and others. We're being very successful. Same things with rivers and streams. I mean, grizzly bear population you talk about. I mean, when I was here, I had the bear biologist at the time when I arrived in I think spring of 1980. He told me, Dan, my belief is that in 30 years we won't have any more grizzly bears in this ecosystem. Well, that was 1980, so we should have, his projection would have put us out of grizzly bears in 2010. Obviously, we have a population now that the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we agree, is a population that can be delisted because it is a recovered population. The elk numbers, you're right. I mean, we go from, at the time of the fire, after the fires in Yellowstone National Park, when habitat and food was strong, we had northern elk population that numbered 20,000, plus, and now we have more or less a stable population of 5,000 plus or minus animals in the northern herd. Wolves weren't here, when I was here in the early 80s, and what a putting that species back in this ecosystem and restoring that predator to the ecosystem has had a dramatic effect on many things. And certainly, some of the things that's affected, it's not just affected, and I would argue how much it's affected the elk populations or the grizzly bear populations, but look at the habitat, how the habitat in Yellowstone has changed once wolves came back into this area. Everything is so interconnected in Yellowstone. When you lose a piece, like the wolves as a predator, or when you change, you don't have the kind of native species of fish that make themselves available to I think cutthroat trout make themselves available to over 200 other species of animal as a food source. If you don't have them migrating into the streams, you don't have them doing their natural functions, you've disrupted an ecosystem. So it is our job to try to restore that ecosystem to the greatest extent possible. And I think we're doing that, and I think we're doing it very, very well.
So whether it's bison or people, Yellowstone is going to have to deal with some of these challenges as we get ready for the summer season of 2017. It may not look like it, but numbers are already picking up here in Yellowstone. I'm Chet Lehman. Thank you for joining us for this Face the State. Have yourself a pleasant Sunday.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.